What's up everyone, my name is MarkHawk and today we're doing a quick side-by-side with the new Sony HDR-AS50 released in 2016 and we're putting it up against Sony's HDR-AS200V from 2015. Now we're going to take these cameras across snowy environments, urban environments, sunny mountainside environments, across all sorts of times of day. Anything you have a question about, you can use any of these quick links above to jump to the section you're most interested in or use as a bookmark reference for later. Anything we discuss in this video, you can check out the more information section below this video, including raw video clips and images you can download for yourself. And if you're using those links, or even if you don't make it to the end of this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. It helps us channel out tremendously. And we'll also have a bunch of referral links that you can use below this video to jump to the products or check out things we mentioned throughout this video that you can use to accompany your action camera awesomeness. And with that out of the way, let's get to it. So we're going to start by taking a look at what each of these cameras does best at 30 frames a second. Now we will transition later into 60 and even 120 frames a second, but right now we want to focus on what each camera can do best at 30 frames a second because it offers us a really good baseline. It allows the cameras to showcase what they can do best without overstraining the camera at their maximum resolution. Now at the time, both of these cameras can only do up to 1080p as their highest resolution. Again, we can jump into different frame rates, but we'll go over that in a little bit. Now you'll notice both of these cameras have a very similar color profile, and it might be very hard to notice really any difference between both of these cameras. And a lot of what's new in the HDR-AS50 that's actually really appealing is kind of under the hood, but we'll again get into that in a little bit here. One of the big things you're going to notice when we zoom in here, the AS50 is much softer and maybe not by a huge degree, but there definitely is a bit of softness. Look at things like blades, the blades of grass in the foreground here compared to the right side of the camera with the AS200V. Look at things like the tire on the bike on the lower left side of each of the screens. You'll notice a little bit more sharpness and clarity in the AS200. Now, as we zoom into 200%, this is mostly to just emphasize a lot of these differences and showcase them much easier. You can notice the blades of the grass on the right side of the screen are much sharper, but things in the distance are pretty much very minimal difference. You don't really notice it as much as things really close in the foreground, which is really good to maybe keep in mind because if you're filming things really close to your face and the camera's really up close, you're going to want that extra sharpness that's maybe offered in the AS200V. But if you're mostly facing your camera on the side of your head and it never really has anything up close, the HDR-AS50 might be a better suit for you. Now, one of the reasons you maybe want to pay attention to these snow comparisons, even if you don't plan on using the camera in the snow or if it's just out of season, is because snow is very problematic to film in. It's one giant reflector that causes all sorts of exposure issues in sort of small image sensor cameras, especially in action cameras. Here you can see both cameras are actually handling it really well. We have this really bright surface in the front of the camera, and everything in the foreground and background, that sort of trails off and gets really dark. Our shadows aren't being crunched down. We don't seem to be losing a ton of information, except maybe in those like white spots in the bottom left of your screen. Everything there was really nice and crisp in those whites, but the whites were a little hot, but it's very appealing. It's a really nice color profile, even if you are losing some information in the white. Now here we have a lot of contrasting values. We have that really bright sky, but we have this very neutral foreground with the reflection, and everything seems to be really good. Again, the AS200V, you can kind of see that sharpness difference in that skyscraper on the right. Even though it is in the distance, we can notice things like the window tiles and panels. They're a little bit softer on the AS50. As we zoom in here, you can really see that on that teal building on the right side of your screen. Just look at things again like the windows or the lines in that sort of black and white building on the right side of your screen. But things like the clouds in the distance, they kind of basically blend together. Now we have this test here basically to show you the sharpness. Look at things like the font on the iPhone there between these two cameras. Some of the sort of hair detail on my chin is a really good idea of how some of these sharpness and details differences are between these two cameras. But again, you'll notice that the color profile differences aren't too much, but the AS200V on this giant reflector of snow, we can see more detail. It's basically not reflecting the snow, it's finding more contrast. The things like the tree details and the branches, it's not as muddy as it is on the AS50. Now I figure early on you're going, well, the AS200V, clearly the better camera, it just looks better. But there's, again, a lot of stuff going under the hood with the AS50, and what we're going to showcase now is some of the different field of view options you have, and pretty much the lack of field options you have with the AS200V. Now the AS50 offers 4 different field of view. What we're going to look at first is its wide field of view. Now both cameras come with this by default. They both basically have a 170-degree field of view with some pretty extreme lens distortion on the side. Now both of these cameras can enable SteadyShot, which will actually crop in our image sensor a little bit so it looks like we're zoomed in. The only problem is when we rely on SteadyShot and we're not actually moving the camera, the plate will have a tendency to drift a little bit. If you kind of look closely on the AS200V on the right side of your screen, it will actually be slightly going down, and you'll see it much clearer in the next part where we zoom in. Now the AS50 has narrow, which basically is SteadyShot without the stabilization. Now this locks our plate so we don't have to worry about it sort of doing anything sort of floaty or weird. It's a really nice addition because we don't have to rely on SteadyShot to be there. And one of the other options that the HDR-AS50 has is a variable zoom option. And what this is basically you can use the remote or your cell phone or the camera itself to zoom in on the lens. Now this is basically just a digital zoom, but if you're doing things like you're just setting up the camera sort of on the side of a field and you want to sort of record yourself practicing or filming your family, you can basically crop the image sensor however you want up to, I think, about 300 or 350%, the equivalent of a digital zoom. Now you can do this if you just filmed in wide field of view and zoomed it in later. It is the same effect, but if you don't want to do that later, if you just want to quickly reference what you were doing on the field from far away, the AS50 is the only one that gives you this option. The AS200V is pretty much limited to just wide field of view and SteadyShot, while again, the HDR-AS50 has basically these four modes being wide, steady, narrow, and variable field of view. So it's a cool option to have. Now both of these cameras are doing a pretty good job of handling things like blue skies really well. Areas of a similar color that sort of gradually shade into a different shade of color. So when you go from like blue to lighter blue to lighter blue, sometimes you can get a lot of compression artifacting, and it's basically just that camera's range of handling those colors and compression. If it doesn't have a wide range, you'll start to notice a lot of blocking in things like the sky, or even in like these white values as we go from like one sort of shade of white to another shade of white. We'll kind of go into that a little bit later maybe, but for now, I just wanted to kind of point out that both of these cameras aren't doing any sort of weird things in the sky. Now in this next section, we're actually going to start looking at things like lens distortion. Both of these cameras actually have a pretty bad lens distortion. The AS200V is basically mimicking a 7.1mm lens. Basically what you need to know is that means you're going to have basically a circle in the middle where things don't seem distorted, and as you get wider out from that circle, it gets much more distorted. The AS50 is practically the same. It lessens it up a little bit this time around. You'll notice as I swivel, the sort of stretching on the sides, the left and the right side of the screen, isn't as bad as the AS200V, but it's a very minimal difference. But it's enough that I want to point it out because it is an improvement over last year. Now outside of Sony's color profile, its ability to do SteadyShot is really its big selling point. So what we're showcasing here is the AS50 with SteadyShot off and on, and what we're showcasing here now is the AS200V with SteadyShot off and on. Some of the clear differences when SteadyShot is off, you have that much wider field of view because you are just filming with a wide field of view. You're going to be able to see more of the scene, but you're going to introduce, you're going to have a lot of those handheld jitters. You're seeing as we're just sort of snowboarding here, it's picking up on every little micro vibration that we do. We are filming here at 60 frames a second. You can kind of see there's no motion blur. Everything looks really nice and poppy with that color profile. Now when we turn SteadyShot on, we are a little bit zoomed in, which if you're doing these sort of selfie stick poses, you might need to get a slightly longer stick. We're using the AS50's sort of launch 3-in-1 mount. It's really cool, but anyway, it removes a lot of those micro vibrations. And again, we have both of these cameras here synced, so we're just basically comparing which camera is doing SteadyShot better. And honestly, it's really hard to notice any sort of difference here. Right now, we've actually frozen the plate here just so you can see some of the sharpness differences when we have SteadyShot turned on. You can still see the AS200V is still keeping it nice and sharp. That word marker on the top of my helmet is very legible on both of these, but there's just a noticeable difference in the AS200V. The bottom line is SteadyShot is available in both of these cameras and is a rad addition to an action camera itself. It really just helps save a lot of shots that basically can be ruined. Now there's a lot that's been updated with the AS50 hardware-wise to make filming underwater right out of the box perfect. Basically we get a flat lens case. Now if you look at the AS200V, it did not ship with a flat lens case. It was an additional purchase. So that bubble lens that you originally got with the camera was really good at protecting water but not filming underwater. The AS50 ships with a really nice dive housing that actually doesn't take up a lot of real estate either, so mounting it to the side of your head is nice. Plus, when you're getting splattered, if you're sort of using a motorcycle or you're mountain biking or snowboarding, the surface area isn't as big, so it isn't capturing as much water and stuff. Now, the AS200V, again, did ship with the dive housing, but the dive housing was an additional purchase, and its sort of surface area that its flat lens took up was massive. So it's really nice that the AS50 has that smaller housing and is basically good right out of the box. And you can see as we go back and forth here just what a big difference the bubble housing makes over a flat lens surface. Now, both of these cameras actually do ship with the ability to change the scene mode. So scene normally is for filming out of water when we don't have a lot of blue in our environment. But when we do have a lot of blue in our environment, we can change the scene to underwater, which introduces a little bit more red grading to our color profile, and it forces the camera to balance out to make our whites a little better at being white instead of that sort of yellowy blue. Now, we will swap back and forth between both of these, but both of these cameras do offer this. Again, just sort of notice the whites on the mask. You'll notice how they go from being like a sort of yellowy white to that really nice, cool, crisp blue white. It just has a really nice pop, and it's good because you don't need to buy a red filter to help balance out your camera. It's just something that's very subtle, and usually when you turn it on, you don't ruin your shots. You're generally enhancing your shot, even if you're in teal or ocean water. But we are just filming in a tub here. Pretty much everything in the tub is white. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to a set of water that's actually really teal, and you'll notice as we go under the water, immediately the AS50 will change to be a lot more red much faster. The AS200V basically stays blue. Now, both of these cameras are filming with the scene set to underwater mode. I'm pretty sure the AS200V is set to underwater mode, but it seems a little too teal, so I might have messed something up there, considering I actually did not get the frames per second 60 on the AS200V. Again, when we are underwater, you can notice things like sharpness is pretty much on par with both of these cameras, but the AS50, the way it sort of balances out that red, is working really well. Again, the AS200V in this scenario might be not set to underwater, but the AS50 on your left side of your screen balances out the colors really well. When we do zoom into 100% here, things like particles and bubbles, you know what, they do look a little bit sharper on the AS200V on the right side of your screen. Now, we are filming here at 120 frames a second. You can see things like surface tension breaking in the water. There's a lot of cool ripples. We have all those bubbles. When you are filming at 120 frames a second, you want to make sure you have really bright conditions because basically our shutter is basically opening and closing faster, so it has less time to collect light. So as you get closer to the end of your day, maybe switch back to 30 frames a second, but when you're in the middle of the day like this, just basically having the ability to do this in slow motion looks great. Also keep in mind that when we are filming at 120 frames a second, the image quality will not be as good as 30 frames a second, but not really at a loss to kind of like stop you from doing it. But you know, if you want to capture that special moment, maybe 30 to 60 frames a second might be better, but this is cool. And both of these cameras are actually filming at 120 frames a second, and what we're doing is we're slowing it down in post-production. The AS200V actually does give you the ability to film in a mode where it will actually it'll automatically make the footage slow motion when you view it later. The AS50, you have to do all that work yourself later in post-production. Actually, the AS200V gives you the option to do both of those if you would like. Now here you can see us filming at 120 frames per second, playing it real time, and just basically how much smoother and how much slower 4x slow motion, what 25% looks like. It's really simple if you want to do this effect yourself. Whatever software you're in, just have the playback go to 30 frames a second instead of playing it at 120 frames per second, and you'll be able to slow it down. Now, on your right side of your screen, the AS200V actually can film at 240 frames a second at a much lower resolution, nothing HD, but basically 480p. Now, on the left side of your screen is the same shot being slowed down 8 times, but we can only film at 120 frames per second. On the right side of your screen, we can slow down 8 times slowness, but everything is really nice and smooth. However, if you really look at the size comparison, it's a huge degradation. You'll notice the right side of your screen is actually much softer now than what the AS50 was before, and you can see basically between these two plates just how much smaller it is when you are filming at 240 frames a second. But if you ever do want that option, it is available here, but if you have something like a modern cell phone, chances are you actually have that option to film with your phone. So if you want to get those one-off slow motion shots, maybe it's better to do it with your phone because it'll be a higher resolution. But yeah, this is our audio test for these two cameras. Now I'm just talking at a normal tone and you're able to hear the voice. In a second here, we're going to cut over to some sort of idle helicopter noise in the background. Now all of these cameras are not in their waterproof case. Anything in the waterproof case is going to sound muffled greatly in comparison. It'll sound fine for the most part, but it's not going to be something you're going to listen to later and be like, oh man, that sounds great. It's always going to be like, oh, I'm surprised how well that sounds in the case, but it is around something you expect. So I get asked a lot what this sounds like with the cameras inside the case if the sound is too muffled. So this is what it sounds like when I'm just doing general talking, and that's with sort of noise in the background, just to give you an idea on what the distance is like. Now while I said most of the time your voice will just be muffled when filming through the dive case, on the AS50 it's actually virtually silent. You cannot hear my voice at all while I'm filming this, which is why I'm talking over it. It's also a good time to point out that the AS50 does not have a microphone jack, but the AS200V does. So now we're going to transition into filming in low light or during golden hour, which is actually my favorite time to test any action camera. Now if you do decide to test your action camera out, you're going to want to make sure you get the right micro SD card for both of these cameras. Sony's line of action cameras are a little bit particular in the micro SD card they want in order to use full maximum quality. Now, full maximum quality using the full bitrate is the XAVC-S mode, and that can only be enabled if you have the right micro SD card. Now, we use a Class 10 or USH class card, but really what matters is the format. You want to make sure you get an XC formatted card, which is generally restricted to sizes 64 gigabytes and up. So if you're using a 32 gigabyte card, chances are you're filming on an HC formatted card only in MP4 mode. This will actually not allow you to use the full bitrate quality. If you want to use the full 50 megabits offered in both of these cameras, you want to make sure you have that XC formatted card, and you can look for suggestions in the more information section below this video. Now, Sony's line of action cameras have always been really good in filming in low light, and that includes golden hour. Its color profile just gives it a really nice pop and balance that makes things like this sun look really nice. All of these blades of grass look nice, and just having sort of the color transition look really well. Again, the AS200V just has a really nice sharpness to it, and we will move these cameras around a little bit just so we can start to see some of the streakiness and motion blur stuff. But right now, just look at how these colors transition. The left side of the plate is actually the left side of the plate, and as we transition into the right, it's how it would be seamlessly. The AS200V just maybe a little bit more on the magenta side, the AS50 a little bit more on the green side. It's a little minor bit of taste, but again, 9 times out of 10, these color profiles look almost identical. Looking at these sort of left to right, you don't really notice a big difference, but you do notice like those hot spots on the AS200V. That sort of sun in the middle is just getting really overexposed. We are actually losing a lot of that information. If you wanted to do sort of work in post-color correction, you're going to want to make sure you film in flat mode. We're filming in vivid color mode just because it really looks nice, and for most people, that's the mode we're going to be filming in. But if you are filming in flat mode, you get a much wider range of sort of white to black values. We won't be going over that too much in this video. We cover it in a lot of other videos. But if you're a colorist or if you're somebody that likes to do a lot of post-production work, it actually might be worth filming in flat color mode. Now, both of these cameras offer time-lapse modes, and there's a huge difference on the AS200V. Basically, the AS200V, its time-lapse mode, is it's taking stills of just video, which are these very low-res 2.1 megapixel images. They're basically less than like 400 kilobytes most of the time. The Sony HDR-AS50 is actually using 4K stills from the video, which offer a lot more range. Again, it's not going to really have that sort of color range in terms of like post-production for maybe cell phone photos, but it works way better, tons better than the AS200V. It just offers a lot more information on the AS200V to have these 4K time lapses, and I actually use these a lot to basically take a bunch of stills while snowboarding and share them on Instagram with some minor tweaks. Now here we are filming in low light and basically night, and we're going to do some motion. You can kind of see how that lens distortion in that sky does a weird sort of streaky thing on the AS200V as we're turning to the left. The AS50's sort of muddiness is really starting to get in the way of a lot of that grass detail you see at the bottom of your screen. And yeah, as we move it, the sky on the AS200V, it just sort of exposes in a really weird way. A lot of information on the AS50 on the left side of your screen is basically lost in that canyon, but a lot of the sky just looks really nice. Now, most of the time when we are filming at night, we usually have another camera that's not very good in low light situations. Both of these cameras are actually filming in a virtually like non-lit zone here. We are in the middle of the mountains. There's no street lights where we are, but it almost seems like we're filming at dusk, like there's still a lot of sunlight around, but where I'm filming when we were filming this was pitch black, and both of these cameras will do an excellent job in filming in low light, with the only difference really being the AS200V is a little bit better with clarity. Now both of these cameras can do still photography. With the AS50, its button placement is on the top, which makes taking photos with your hand much easier because it doesn't shake the camera, and that button release is much easier. The AS200V's button placement is in the back and it's a little bit squishy, so generally when you press it, it's going to shake the camera since the photo is taken immediately. But both of these cameras do offer some really great images. I could sort of be very nitpicky here, but really just go to the more information section below this video and download some of those raw clips and images, and you can really see both of the quality on both of these cameras look really excellent side by side. Both of these cameras actually do offer field of view options, including the AS200V for photos. You can actually do that narrow field of view. You can do adjustable variable zoom on the AS50. All those field of view controls that both of those cameras have do come through to the photo side of the options. I'll also point out that the AS200V does have a smaller megapixel, but it is apparently packing in more information into that smaller image sensor than the AS50 can, because the AS50 is basically just sort of an upscaled AZ1, which was Sony's lower end model, and they basically have put a lot of those parts into the AS50. And yes, we have a higher megapixel, but that doesn't necessarily mean better quality. But again, both of these images are very on par with one another. Now, one last thing I wanted to talk about with both of these cameras is the hardware differences, because this time around it is actually kind of a big deal. Now, we talked before about how the AS50 ships with the dive housing, which is great, but it is available on the AS200V at an additional cost, but we won't have the ability to control the buttons, so you'll basically have to set your settings ahead of time before you go in the water. Now, the AS200V is splash proof right out of the box. Its sort of housing, its natural sort of body, is a much higher quality than the AS50. The AS200V offers sort of rubber around the edges, that way if it gets splashed, it'll basically survive. The AS50 is made of a much cheaper plastic. It has this sort of black body that's kind of uninspired, but its physical button layout is a little bit better. But one of the areas that the AS50 really shines is its UI. Its UI is much faster and is much better laid out. It's quicker to get in and change settings, and it also has Bluetooth this time around, which means when it's connecting to its new Live View remote, not only is that faster, but we're not draining the Wi-Fi on the battery nearly as fast as we are with the AS200V. The AS200V's battery in a one-to-one and recording comparison isn't too bad. It's not too far off, but having that Bluetooth and Wi-Fi setting turned on both of those cameras, the AS200V is going to drain almost like 40% faster than the AS50. The AS50's Bluetooth and just that UI much faster. That new sort of grid layout design and selecting option doesn't drop you back off to the menu. If you are just using the AS200V, this is things you'll quickly get used to and live with, but it's one of those things, it's like, man, I wish this just did this a little faster. I wish when I pressed this didn't happen. Anyway, folks, that's going to wrap up our side-by-side comparison of the AS50 versus the AS200V. Let me know what you thought or what your experiences have been in the comments section below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and check out those links in the more information section below this video for raw image clips or sort of links to the products we talked about, as well as some micro SD card suggestions. Now, we will be putting the AS50 up against a review of a bunch of other different action cameras. Be sure to follow us and check up on that. You can also watch progress or check out our adventures on Instagram, join the conversation on Twitter, all that social media stuff. But really, I just want you guys to visit MarkHawkCam.com, where you can actually leave your own reviews on the cameras and products we review on top of my review. That way we can sort of have a community average. It's not just my opinion versus no one's. It's basically a community effort. And we have a bunch of fun stuff going on over there, and I'm really trying to build that up. But anyway, I'm MarkHawk. Let me know what you thought in the comments section below, and I'll see you out there. Have a good one, everyone.